So we're with Frank Houston, and just tell us, Frank, a little, what your title is, who you represent, and a little bit about your background, maybe.
Sure. My name's Frank Houston. I'm the campaign director for A Better Michigan Future. We're a coalition of over 40 organizations in Michigan, representing about 2 million people, who are concerned about tax and budget reform, making sure that we have a balanced approach to addressing our fiscal crisis here in Michigan and our structural deficit. Making sure we have we know we're going to have more budget cuts, but also making sure we have some reform and revenue as part of the budget equation. And in terms of my background, I grew up here in Michigan. I was born and raised in Wyandotte. I went to school at Eastern Michigan University where I got my degree. And along the way, I've been a city council member, a school teacher, ran several nonprofits and ballot initiatives, and I'm pleased to be here in Michigan, back in my home state for about 7 years now.
Okay, so let's dig in here a little bit. We talked off the record. You were at the Business Leaders Forum. I believe you said it was last week.
Business Leaders for Michigan. Yeah.
For Michigan, okay. Just so what was talked about there? I mean, it was supposed to be, I think, where, as you explained it, where Governor Snyder kind of laid out some of his plans for the budget that he's going to announce in the next few days. So did you learn anything? And if so, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think largely the forum, it was the Business Leaders for Michigan Forum, so it was largely targeting, what are business leaders interested in when it comes to fiscal policy for the state. And really, I think there was two main things that came out of it. One was they would like to cut public employees paying health care an awful lot. The second thing, though, was the governor did provide an attempt to provide more transparency to the citizenry on how our state budget's structured, what are some of the big ticket items in it, and what are some of the vulnerabilities that we're having to look at. So bottom line, I think the governor saw this as an opportunity to unveil his report called Dollars and Cents, which is really designed to be a citizen guide to help citizens evaluate our budget. I think the problem with it was it largely compared what I've been saying is apples to marshmallows, where they take, for instance, a public employee with a master's degree and compare them to a part-time employee who graduated from high school and say, well, wait, this person makes $30,000, this person makes $60,000, public employees are overpaid. So I think there were some weaknesses in the report, but overall I thought the forum was still, and the attempt to be more transparent and to bring citizens into the process, I'll give the governor kudos for, even if I think the methodology of the report was a little flawed.
Did you get, since Governor Snyder hasn't been run for public office before, did you get any sense of what kind of leader he's going to be? This is really, even though he's given a state of the state, this is going to be his first budget.
Right.
Do you have a sense of where his priorities lie?
I think it would be naive for me to speculate what's in his head too much right now. But what I generally have seen from the governor so far, he seems to be intelligent, seems to be pragmatic, seems to keep his cards pretty close to his chest until he's ready to unveil a plan. I think we can also speculate, though, on some of the other things based on what people have released or said on his behalf at points. So, for instance, one of the really interesting things actually at the Business Leaders for Michigan Forum was his state budget director Nixon, new guy on the job, fresh from Utah. He's been out here a couple months now. Talked about corrections very openly and said, you know what, this is a huge area of expenditure for the state. And it's one thing to be tough on crime, using his word, it's another thing to pay for it. And maybe we don't want to pay to be that tough on crime with things like mandatory minimums. So to hear, a Republican administration just throw out something like that and put corrections on the block as somewhere where we might need to do some real reform or figure out how much we're really willing to pay for that sort of vision was, interesting, to say the least, and I think got a little talk. But also, I think the other thing that's becoming more and more clear is the governor has surrounded himself with people that are very much like him. Smart people who are pragmatic, numbers-driven, but for the most part, a few ideologues, in my opinion, like every administration, but are largely millionaires or people who will be very close to millionaires by the end of this administration. So it's almost like a millionaire's cabinet or a corporate CEO cabinet that many of the people involved seem to represent. So I think a lot of folks are, growingly concerned that, is he going to get stuck in a bubble, which almost every governor at some point or another can be, particularly if they haven't been in that position before. But I think the governor needs to be very careful about who he's having weigh in on the debate these upcoming weeks to show he's not just representing a narrow set of CEOs.
So you don't feel like he's getting a lot of input from average working folks, let's say?
Well, not yet, but you know what? I don't want to sound the alarm just yet. I mean, he has only been in office a few months. He's probably getting a lay of the land of the numbers. He's an accountant, so I mean, I'm sure he's looking at these things and trying to get a good sense of where he sees some waste or room to cut, as well as some opportunities to generate a more stable revenue stream. So I don't want to sound the alarm yet, but I think what has been clear is during this budget process, he's largely had a very narrow set of people weighing in, formulating the first draft of the budget. So I think it behooves him, coming out of him presenting his first draft on Thursday of the budget, they're really getting a lot of citizen feedback over the next 2 months and taking that to heart, as well as legislative leaders who are going to have to vote on it in the end.
Well, speaking of ideology, here's a question I want to ask you: I used to be a business owner. I had a court reporting firm, and I had people that worked for me that did court reporting,
Right.
and the Republicans talk a lot about we have to cut taxes and cut spending in order to create jobs.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's like 2 and 2 makes 7, because I wouldn't hire a court reporter to work for another court reporter, a new court reporter, let's say coming out of school as a new job.
Right.
So I'm creating a job unless I had more clients that were giving me more business.
Right.
So I guess the question I have is, I don't see cutting spending and cutting taxes. Even if I got a tax break as a corporate owner or as a business owner, it might be a few $1,000s a year. That doesn't allow, there's no reason for me to hire anyone because I got a tax break. So what do you have any feeling as far as where that's, if the ideology, like that ideology of cutting taxes and spending is going to drive the conversation in Michigan?
Well, we'll find out Thursday, or at least we'll begin to find out Thursday. My hope is that the governor is not an ideologue. We haven't seen a lot of indication yet that he is one. But there are plenty of other folks in Lansing on both sides of the aisle who are. But the type of ideology you're talking about, I think, is clearly proven to be flawed, to say the least. Or just, I could call it some stronger language, but I won't on camera. But I mean, the bottom line is the concept of trickle-down economics, the concept that we can cut our way out of any fiscal crisis is just proven to be flawed. Now, we also can't just spend our way out of it from the government and the public sector, but that's why we advocate in A Better Michigan Future for a true balanced approach. You're going to have to make more tough cuts, but we also have to have a very clear vision for what are the core services and quality of life items that we want to base our economy and people's lives around in Michigan. If you want police and fire in your community, you want the safe roads and bridges that are actually plowed in the winter and don't fall down when you're driving across them. If you want world-class education for your family, I mean, these are things that we have to pay for. So making sure that we have the adequate, stable revenue stream for those things is essential. And the fact of the matter is, we have a very flawed tax code in Michigan. It's antiquated. It doesn't grow with the economy and shrink with the economy, relatively speaking. And it was really based in a day where we could rely on manufacturing to drive most of the revenue that in turn paid for the taxes and services we wanted. Today, we just don't have that sort of revenue. That's why we, for instance, do support doing a service tax. The more broaden our tax base for the sales tax. That's why we do suggest doing a graduated income tax, where you're shifting the tax burden a little bit from folks who are middle income and lower income wage earners to saying, if you make over $120,000, pay a little bit more. Not $10,000 more a year in taxes, but a little bit more. More comparable to what every other state in the Midwest does, for instance. In the absence of those things, we will continue to see an all-cuts mentality where we have shrinking services, people fleeing the state. And I think it begs the question of how many businesses, families, jobs are going to be here when we're cutting everything that matters so much to all of us.
Do you get this? I mean, you mentioned you didn't get the feeling Governor Snyder is an ideologue, but there are lots of ideologues in Lansing. One of the issues that I think falls along ideological lines is the right to work, and there's been a lot of talk about that. I know that's not a strong focus of your organization,
right.
But where do you think that's headed in Michigan, just as an overall
Hopefully,
thing?
in my opinion, nowhere, but that's my opinion. Our coalition includes a lot of labor organizations that obviously would not like to see right to work brought up. But let me be clear, I think, I'll take the governor's word. It's the wrong time to really be talking about right to work. It's a divisive issue. And in my personal opinion, as well as many of the members of our organization would say, you look at states that have right to work, like I was in Florida before Michigan. I grew up here, but I left the state for a while. And when I was in Florida, it was a right-to-work state. And literally a third of the state was living in poverty in 2004 when I was there. Now it's worse. So I think you look at the states that have right to work, generally wage earners make a lot less money. And I don't see the real benefit. So, but I think to the governor's credit and several conservative business groups' interests as well, I think a lot of folks realize that right now is not the time to be driving that sort of ideological message around policy. We got to be looking at a more balanced approach and finding the middle as much as possible for the good of everyone. So I don't think it's going anywhere right now, but we'll see. There has been bills introduced in the legislature to do almost like regional right-to-work zones, which I think is a bad strategy for a lot of reasons, and it really doesn't get people back to work.
Okay. We talked a little bit off the record about Michigan's situation as far as, you mentioned a number, as far as what percentage of corporations don't pay any taxes still in Michigan due to some of the corporate loopholes that are out there. Can you talk a little bit about, the numbers as far as what percentage of businesses in Michigan don't pay any taxes, and whether that might be part of a balanced approach to solving their budget problems?
Right, and these are rough numbers, of course, but I think the interesting thing is if you look at Michigan's business tax over the last 50 years, we've changed it often. For a long period of time, we had the single business tax, which was created because, in fact, people didn't like a corporate tax structure. So when the single business tax was created and then kind of grew into piecemeal set of reforms along the way over decades, basically, I think most recently it was about 60% of businesses did not pay any tax. So only 40% of businesses in Michigan paid a tax under the single business tax, which is an extremely unpopular tax. So much so that we basically decided to remove it, I believe at the tail end of the Engler administration. And then, since it wasn't gone quick enough, Brooks Patterson, as county executive in Oakland County, led a petition drive to get it removed quicker, which in fact happened. Problem was, when we removed it, we didn't have a real plan to how we're going to replace that revenue. So you lose 20% or so of the state budget revenue without a plan to replace it. And that led to a hurried approach where a lot of legislators went different directions with what they wanted to see. And the governor tried to find common ground around what became the Michigan business tax. Unfortunately, under that tax, there was two main concepts. You have some sort of gross receipts tax for businesses, big and small. And then you also have another main component was the service tax, that was, the 2-penny tax, where if you get your hair cut, you're going to pay 2 cents for every dollar in taxes, where right now we don't pay any taxes on our haircuts, for instance, or our sporting tickets, or our lawn services, or a lot of other things. Our yachts, those of us who are fortunate enough to have them, I'm not one of them. So anyway, when the governor proposed that, there was some pushback. I think the legislature adopted it, though. And then quickly, the Chamber of Commerce and others who were in the room actually designing the Michigan business tax then came back and said, wait, we actually don't like this tax now. Let's at least get rid of the service tax. So we got rid of the service tax, but the governor's one condition was, if I remove this tax and go along with this, I'm asking you to replace the revenue. It has to be revenue neutral. Not revenue positive, despite us having a growing deficit, but revenue neutral. So in turn, they created what's called the surcharge tax, which creates a second tax on businesses based on your gross, whereas the regular MBT was based on your net. So if you think of it, you're a small business owner, you're paying a tax on your gross and a tax on your net. So if you're actually losing money, since you still have gross receipts, if you're a small restaurant owner, you might have gross receipts even when you lose money, obviously. So you're paying taxes at a level that maybe you weren't before. So the surcharge tax has been very unpopular with big and small businesses. There's been pretty bipartisan consensus to get rid of it for the last couple of years and replace it with something else. The problem is no one, once again, wants to talk about how they're going to replace the revenue, which even in a bad economic year is minimum of $700 million or so. So where this takes us today is now Governor Snyder has proposed doing a corporate income tax, a flat 6% income tax, which bottom line is, as I said before, it used to be 60% of businesses in Michigan didn't pay tax. Now it's 70% under the Michigan business tax, and it would potentially change again with the corporate tax. And to what numbers it's still out. I mean, it depends on what he proposes Thursday. Devil's in the details. But what it does, I think, is this constant changing the business tax. You're looking at potentially 3 completely different business tax structures, maybe you could even argue 4, within a 6-year period. That's not healthy because it's not stable. And when I've talked to small business owners, at least in my community, what they tell me is, you know what, we can handle a service tax. We can handle the MBT, the SBT, or this corporate tax, but pick something, stick with it. Make it easy for us to understand how to deal with the tax code, how to plan for it, what our costs are going to be there, instead of it being volatile and changing every single year. So I think the biggest thing is we need to get this right. It can't be some knee-jerk reaction, and it can't be catering a narrow set of special interests. This has to be a tax code that provides stable, adequate revenue, and it can't just be a tax cut for the business class without another revenue stream helping replace that revenue. The most alarming thing to me right now is that the governor has thrown out this concept of literally it's $1.5 billion tax cut under his corporate tax proposal. $1.5 billion tax cut for businesses, many of which don't pay much to begin with, if at all. So I think we have to look very carefully then at if we're going to double the size of our deficit, which is what we'd be doing, what is going to be the impact on other services in the absence of other revenue sources?
So even though we've already got, depending on who you listen to, between a 1.5 and a 1.8 billion dollar structural deficit, and then this would be on top of that?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're talking $3 billion dollars. And there's no revenue stream to there's been no proposed revenue stream to replace any of it.
Well, I don't want to say that. The governor has talked, and to his credit, we give him kudos once again for this, he's talked about taking a look at tax expenditures, or what we call tax loopholes, that don't create jobs or have a clear public impact that's positive. Problem is, when, for instance, the House Republicans looked at it, who are obviously the leadership in the House, they came out and said, well, we want to take a look at tax expenditures, and the first one we want to eliminate, the one that they said they were 100% sure they wanted to eliminate, was the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is roughly $400 million designed to help make sure that small businesses can pay people low wages but still put people to work. So this is the Earned Income Tax Credit was something Ronald Reagan initially championed federally, and the state one was designed very similarly. It's to help people who are working for a living but would fall into poverty at these low-wage jobs without a little bit extra tax break.
That money is as I understand Earned Income Tax Credits, that money is 100% stimulative because basically all of that money gets spent in the economy.
Exactly. And I don't want to give exact numbers, but I think the reality is, if you're making minimum wage or close to it, you're probably not using that little bit you're saving from the income tax credit to jet off to the Bahamas or Europe on vacation. You're spending that on immediate needs in your community. Clothes for your kids, maybe you're going out to eat occasionally. And these are things that stimulate the economy locally, and that money stays local. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, although our coalition hasn't taken a position on it officially, many of our members, of course, have, I think that the reality is when you're looking at these sorts of tax expenditures, or many of which are tax loopholes, it's important to look at what was the purpose of the program. Is it in the public interest, and is it having that impact? Do we have a way of evaluating it? And at least with the Earned Income Tax Credit, you can say, okay, there's a clear public benefit, and there's a way we can evaluate its impact. And it's actually working the way it's designed to do. Now, if the legislature decides that's no longer a priority, that's obviously within their purview. But I think that what we really should be looking at are tax loopholes where, for instance, oil and gas companies don't always pay their taxes. That's ridiculous. At a time where oil and gas companies are making record profits still, any money, $5 spent on those sorts of loopholes is too much in my opinion, at least.
Okay. Anything else that you learned at the forum, or the thing that you think we're going to learn? We're going to learn on Thursday. Lieutenant Governor Calley made this atomic bomb statement that got a lot of press when he made it. Do you think that we're going to really have this economic bomb going off on Michigan's economy on Thursday when the budget gets announced?
Well, I think the atomic bomb quote that Lieutenant Governor Calley used was unfortunate. As the quote, the governor's spokesperson, was an unfortunate choice of words. But I really think it isn't going to hit Thursday. I think it hit a couple years ago in 2008, and some would argue far earlier. So the reality is we've all been dealing with very tough financial decisions from state government leaders down to families around their kitchen table for years. But that's why my hope is at least that the governor's administration puts forward Thursday a balanced approach to dealing with those issues and doesn't take some sort of extreme all cuts approach. Or just says, you know what, we'll close a couple of these tax loopholes that before for instance, Democrats in the House passed, but Republicans didn't go along with, or the governor might have vetoed, or whatever. I think it's important that if we're going to take some of these low-hanging fruit items that both parties can agree should go, some of these tax loopholes, that money is being reinvested into the things that we really need in the state, like good schools, safe, healthy communities, adequate environmental protections, and so on, and not just giving a tax cut to the rich CEOs or a narrow set of business interests, which that's the real concern right now I have, is that I don't want to speculate on what the governor will do too deeply until he proposes his budget. I want to hope for the best for him. But it does appear that right now what he's proposing is, let's do $1.5 billion in tax cuts for businesses, mostly large businesses, and then shift that tax burden onto working people and struggling people, or just cut state government to the point where the basic services we all count on are gone. And that, to me, is unacceptable. So hopefully he'll do better. We'll find out Thursday.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time, Frank.
Thanks, Bruce. Good.